Hi, boys and girls. Yesterday we stopped in the middle of chapter 7 of the Parker Inheritance, just after Candace had read through the whole letter that she found in her grandmother's attic. And right now she is sitting at the table, and Brandon is kind of trying to get a look at the letter, and she hasn't handed it to him quite yet. So that's where we will start back up. "You seem a little busy," Brandon said, glancing at the letter. "Do you want me to come back?" "Here," she said, thrusting the paper at him. "Can you read this?" He frowned, but took the letter. Candace tried not to cringe as he read to himself, his lips moving silently as he made his way down the page. She was a little surprised that she actually handed the letter to Brandon. He was nice, but she'd only known him for a few days. He was just a boy from across the street. But there was something about the way he sat there, with the welts beading on his face, wearing a backpack way too big for his frame, a backpack full of books that for some reason he couldn't check out on his own because they were too girly. She didn't know if she could trust him, but she wanted to. Plus, she really wanted to talk with someone about the letter. "Interesting," he said, after finishing the letter. "And what does that say?" He pointed to the envelope in her grandmother's note. "Just scribbles," Candace quickly said, sliding it away from her. She wasn't ready to share everything yet. "Any idea who wrote the letter?" "No, I assume that whoever he is, he likes being mysterious. I bet he's the same guy who made the donation to the library." "Well, there's a lot of stuff in the letter that's kind of superfluous," he said. "That means—" "I know what it means, dictionary boy," she jutted her thumb towards herself. "Daughter of a professional writer, remember?" He laughed. "Of course. Anyway, he wrote about a lot of things that don't even have to do with the Washingtons." Brandon scanned the letter again. "Do you know when they were forced to leave the city?" Candace shook her head. "My guess is that it must have been in the 50s or 60s. "You know, he mentioned you in here as well," Brandon said. "Huh?" "Last paragraph," he said, "where he's talking about making a better world for your grandchild." "He didn't say grandchildren. He was speaking directly to your grandmother about you." Brandon shrugged. "Granddad told me you were Miss Caldwell's only grandchild." "I didn't even see that. I totally read it as grandchildren," she said. He handed the letter back to Candace. "I think we should talk to my granddad about it." She was already shaking her head. "I don't know. We've got cookies. Mom baked them yesterday." Candace's stomach chose that moment to grumble. Cookies sounded so much better than sandwiches. She took a deep breath. "So, you actually believe this is real?" "My mom thinks it's a hoax." "Well, it could be. But what if it's not? I mean, if there really is a fortune out there waiting to be found, don't you think someone would have found it by now?" Candace didn't like the way she sounded like her mom. "Do you think it's real?" he asked. Candace thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I do. It was so much easier to think it was real when two people believed it." She looked at the note on the envelope, rubbing her grandmother's bracelet. "Make that 3 people." Chapter 8. Candace had just bitten into her second oatmeal chocolate chip cookie when Brandon's sister entered the kitchen. She was too busy typing at her phone to notice them. Tori wore all black except for a pair of purple boots and a small silver pendant around her neck. Her hair was natural like Candace's mother's, but longer, with twists reaching down to her shoulders. She looked amazing. "I'm heading to work," she said, her thumbs flying across the screen. "One of the girls is sick, so I have to go in early." "Tori works at a clothing store at one of the strip malls," Brandon said to Candace. He was munching on a snickerdoodle. "I can't remember the name. They're all the same." Tori looked up. "Oh, hello there." Candace waved meekly. "Hi," she mumbled. A piece of cookie fell out of her mouth. She could have died. "We have company," Brandon said. "Yeah, thanks for the heads up on that," Tori said, pocketing her phone. "You could have told me." She stopped, marched across the kitchen, and took Brandon's chin, and tilted his face up. The scratches weren't bleeding, but they were still red. "What happened?" He shook free of her grip. "I fell in a bush." "You're such a horrible liar," Tori turned to Candace. "Was it that little brat Milo?" "You don't have to answer that," Brandon said. "What does this look like, a courtroom?" Tori asked. Candace set down her cookie. "I don't know their names." Milo's the ringleader, about as big as my pinky, but really mean, just like his older sister. Tori walked to the cabinet and pulled out a bottle of hydrogen peroxide. You should have put something on those welts as soon as you got home. She doused a napkin and then began patting Brandon's face. Mom and Granddad are going to have a fit. Not if you don't tell them. I don't have to tell them. They'll know once they see your face. Tori brushed a piece of grass out of his hair. Let me talk to his sister. She's home from college this summer. I can probably convince her to get Milo to lay off. Me getting my big sister to stop a bully, that'll really go over well with the guys at school. Tori kissed her brother on the cheek. Will you look after him? She asked Candace. My brother is the brainiest kid I've ever met, but that clearly doesn't translate to street smarts. Sure, Candace said. Then she clamped her mouth shut. What was she agreeing to? She had enough problems. She didn't want to add getting beat up to her list. Thanks, Tori reached her hand out. By the way, who are you? Candace Miller. She shook Tori's hand. From across the street. Tori sized her up. Let me know if you ever want to go shopping. I get a great discount. Though those shredded jeans are really cool. Kind of retro. Candace wanted to reach down and cover her knees. She wasn't used to getting compliments about her clothes. They're comfortable, she said. Brandon tapped the table. Weren't you leaving? Tori rolled her eyes. Spoil sport, she muttered. She tugged on her brother's ear before swiping a cookie from his pile. Hey, wait a second, he said as she reached the door. Do you know when Granddad will be home? He's on his way now, Tori said. I was just texting him. Since when did Granddad learn how to text? Since Miss Kathy made him get a smartphone. She slung a bag over her shoulder. Our Granddad's got a new girlfriend, she told Candace. Brandon shuddered. That sounds strange. Old people aren't supposed to have girlfriends. Okay, Tori said as she went out the door. Next time I'll call her his lover. Even with the door closed between them, Candace could hear Tori's laugh loud and clear. Brandon's grandfather was nowhere near as cool as his granddaughter. He entered the house wearing a grungy white t-shirt and gray slacks, with red and blue suspenders, though his pants didn't seem to be at any risk of sliding off. He caught sight of Brandon and Candace at the table. A large grin spread across his face. Then his eyes narrowed. Boy, what in the world happened to your face? Brandon tensed up. His mouth flapped open, but no words came out. I tripped Brandon by accident, Candace said. He fell into our holy bush. She guessed this was part of her duties in looking after Brandon. His grandfather grunted. That's Brandon for you, always stumbling over his own 2 feet. He went to the sink and washed his hands. And you are? Granddad, this is my friend Candace, from across the street, Brandon said. Ah, Abigail Caldwell's daughter. Granddaughter. Should have known that. You look just like her. He toddled off as he walked to the kitchen table. Rudolph Gibbs, he said, tipping his head towards Candace. Nice to meet you. Mr. Gibbs reached over Candace and grabbed a cookie. He and his grandson favored each other in a lot of ways. Both carried slight builds, with heads shaped more like ovals than circles. Mr. Gibbs' hair was short like Brandon's, but way more white than black. A few large moles covered his dark skin. He smelled like cigarettes and gasoline. Well, welcome to the neighborhood, he said, sitting down at the table. There are plenty of kids around here to play with. Maybe you can get Brandon out there with you. I go outside all the time, Brandon said. Shooting hoops by yourself in the backyard don't count, Mr. Gibbs said. In my day, me and my buddies would be all over the neighborhood. Wouldn't come home till dark. You kids nowadays. He nudged Candace. Ain't that right? Sure, Candace said. Mr. Gibbs, Brandon said you knew my grandmother pretty well. Yep, she was good people. He broke his cookie in 2. It's a shame what happened to her. Candace didn't know if he was talking about her being fired or the heart attack that killed her. If you don't mind me asking, did she ever tell you why she was let go from the city? She and Brandon had decided earlier on a plan to approach his grandfather without revealing anything about the letter. All I know is that it had to do with her tearing up Vickers Park, he said. She claimed it was a mistake, but them good old boys in the city office was probably waiting for any chance to fire her. A lot of 'em didn't like a black woman telling 'em what to do. Candace reached for the hole in her knee and pulled at one of the strands. Do people think she was, incompetent or crazy? He took a long time chewing the rest of his cookie before responding. I won't lie, most of us were right perplexed. People couldn't understand how the city manager could screw up so much that she'd tear up a perfectly good tennis court. But when they followed the paper trail, the work order led right back to her. He reached for another cookie. It was good that she left town. A lot of folks in Vista Heights weren't too pleased. Vickers Park has been around for a long time, during the time of Jim Crow. It was the only public place where blacks could peacefully meet. There's no way we would have been allowed to step foot in those other parks. Those were for whites only. Candace thought about some of the books she'd read about the civil rights era. She wondered if black kids had ever tried to use the white-only parks, and if so, what happened to them. Did police use water cannons and dogs to attack them like they had in other places in the South? Okay, thanks for letting us know, she said. She looked at Brandon, and he gave a quick nod. On to Plan B. Hey, Granddad, do you have a few more minutes? Brandon asked. I wanted to talk to you about some of the old families that used to live here. Really? For what? Just a research project, he said, not looking at his grandfather. Trace your roots sort of thing. Tori was right. Brandon was a horrible liar. A research project? For school? In the summer? His grandfather leaned back in his chair. You should give Cousin Larisha a ring. She's already completed our family tree all the way back to the 1800s. Shoot, most of our family ain't even from here. Well, it's not really focused on our family history, more like researching some of the other families from Lambert. I figured since Candace didn't have anything else going on this summer, maybe she could help me with the investigating. Okay, now I get it, he grinned. How about this? I've been at Chuck's all morning, helping him replace a transmission in his old Plymouth Barracuda. Let me spruce up a bit and I'll be back down. He winked at Brandon. That'll give you a chance to have a little more, privacy. Then I'll answer some of the questions you got for me. The two of them nodded. Once Mr. Gibbs left the kitchen, Brandon picked up a cookie and stuffed it into his mouth, and then another after that. Candace stopped him before he could eat a third. Okay, what just happened? Wait, he whispered. A minute later, the house shook a little, and the pipes inside the walls groaned. Okay, Granddad's in the shower, he said. Sorry about that. Granddad always acts funny when I bring girlfriends over. He paused then. Not girlfriends, I mean girl, big space, friends. Girls that happen to be friends. I mean, friends that happen to be girls. Candace recalled how he had winked at Brandon. My dad's the opposite, she said. There's no way he would let me and a boy sit in the same room without adult supervision. They became quiet, and Candace wondered if they had both spoken too much. She was pretty sure Brandon didn't like her. Not like that. She surely didn't like him that way, but before she could say anything to fill the awkward void, Brandon opened his backpack and pulled out a book and flipped to the first page. And we're going to stop right there, and we'll finish the rest of Chapter 8 tomorrow. So something that I want you guys to think about is making connections to the time period that we're talking about in this book. So the Parker Inheritance is a fictional book, but some of the events in the book happen in a very real time in history. So Candace and Brandon were talking to Brandon's grandfather and learned that the Washingtons and the Allens lived during the time of the Civil Rights era. I know you've learned some about the Civil Rights era, so I want you to kind of make a connection to some of the things you've learned about the Civil Rights era, and maybe some people that lived during that time, or some events you've learned. And I would like you to comment under this video with some sort of connection you can make to what you've already learned about the Civil Rights era. And we'll finish Chapter 8 tomorrow.